So this is how you throw a pot on a pottery wheel. This is something called a bat, which is basically a piece of wood that you use to hold your object, whatever it is you're making, and prevent it from getting bent or damaged when you pick it up off the wheel. So you start off with a round piece of clay. You just basically do a lot of whacking, and you want it to be as close to round as possible because that basically helps you out with centering the clay. So then you smack it as close to the center as you can. And I was not very close, so I'm going to retry. So okay. Then after you've got the clay on, basically the rule is your hands should not be touching the clay unless they are wet. So we have a bucket of water up here that I'm going to be going into, and a sponge will help. This is called centering the clay, where you're basically pushing down and then pulling up so that the clay is perfectly centered on the wheel. If it's not perfectly centered on the wheel, then you cannot make a bowl or other object without it being wonky in some way. So it's a series of, I'm pushing up with the palm of my hand right there, and I use this hand basically to steady it. So I think of it as sort of like a hinge, and it pushes in and brings the clay up, and then I use the other hand to push it back down again. So go up. And then back down. I'm doing this at relatively high speed. That's the fastest I can go on this particular wheel. Once you have a sense that your clay is fairly well centered, then you need to decide what kind of pot you're going to make, how wide it's going to be, and how tall it's going to be. Hopefully you've already thought of that when you're choosing the clay, because otherwise you may not have enough to do what you want. So once you've decided on your base, you're going to basically try and make sort of an upside down margarine container. So it's basically flat on the bottom, and your sides should be about the same width that you want the base to be. So it's not like a volcano, it's basically sort of straight up and down. And this is where I want my base to end up. So I'm going to try and make a shallow, wide bowl. So I want the base to be pretty wide, otherwise it will be tippy. And if you're putting soup in it, you don't want that. So once I've got my best margarine container, then I'm going to find the true center, and I'm going to drill a hole down into the middle of my thing. My cat is watching very carefully and now is scratching something, which is the noise you hear. So to find the center, and I use my long finger, what is that, your ring finger? Anyways, whatever that finger is, because it tends to be your strongest. So I'm going to go into the middle, and you notice that I know when I've hit the middle, and I'm going to start poking a hole in it. And then I'm going to go downwards, making sure not to run out of water. And then I open it up from the inside. So you'll notice that it's getting a little bit taller. And you can judge how deep your base is based on the difference of using your fingers. So right now, I'd say the base is about that thick, which is a little thick, but not bad for a pot that hasn't been trimmed. So now we have a little baby bowl, and I'm gonna go pack through the middle. I don't think you can really see it, but the middle is not quite completely flattened in the middle. So I'm just running my finger, and again, I'm using this finger, running it into the middle and back out to the side, trying to bring the base out a little bit so that it's not going to be too narrow in the inside. And you should notice that the outer wall is also sort of starting to push outwards because of that pressure from inside. And every once in a while, I'll clean out the extra water and clay from inside, so I'm working on a relatively clean surface. And we go back and forth a few times. This is basically the safest sort of position in which to try and fix any errors that are in the base or the bottom of the pot, because you're working with relatively thick sides and you haven't pulled it outside of its base yet. So once I'm happy with the base, then I'm going to start pulling up the sides. And I will have a slower speed on the wheel, because if I have a high speed on the wheel, as I pull out, there will be a natural tendency for the clay to fly away from the center because of centrifugal forces. So I don't want to emphasize that to the point that I actually make my bowl go wonky because it's going out too fast. So I'm going to go out relatively slowly. And make sure to keep water on the clay at all times. And you sort of get a sense for how much you can push the clay without going too fast too soon. And you notice I'm not pulling the lip outwards yet, even though I intend to do that as long as I haven't wrecked the bowl by that point. Because once you pull out the lip, it's much harder to fix anything, and it also makes it more fragile or more bendable, so it's more likely to mess up if you've gone outwards. So you're going to finish with the sides going outwards. And what I do for fixing the lip, this is the lip of the bowl. If I feel like it's getting a little wonky, I put 2 fingers gently side to side, and then my other finger across, and that kind of pushes the clay down a little bit and thickens up that lip just a little bit, so it makes it a little more stable. Okay, so I'm generally happy with the base of it. I'm not sure if it's too thin actually in the center, but we'll see. And then I'm going to continue pulling it out, and you'll notice my speed is much lower because I don't want to go too fast. And I'm going to dip out that bit in the middle because it's getting a little bit puddly, and adding more clay or more water to the outside because that's where I need some so I can run my fingers up. And by the way, this is how I run my fingers up the side, if you can see that. So basically, this hand is almost like a gauge going up the side of the pot, and this hand, using my forefinger and making it a square, is pushing inwards. So if I want to spread the bowl outwards, then I'm using these fingers to pull it outwards. And if I want it to go up, I do like basically equal measurement. Sorry, I didn't do that on camera. Equal from the top to the bottom, and that should make my bowl higher. If I want it to go inwards, then I'm going to have more pressure from the outside hand. And if I want it to widen, then I'd use more pressure from the outside hand or inside hand. So I'm trying to just get this a little bit wider, and I'm pretty close to where I can go with the thickness of the pot. Different kinds of clay can give you different thicknesses that they're sort of sturdy enough for. This is stoneware, which tends to be sort of more the heavier type pottery that you'd get, as opposed to something like porcelain, which is very, very thin. And so the top of this is about as thin as I want to go, except I'm going to give it an outwards flare for the lip. So I'm going to push a little bit because I feel like that could curve out a little bit. And then I'm going to just pull gently downwards using my fingers here. And it feels like it's getting dry, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. And I'm going to tip that outwards. And one of the things when you're pulling up the bowl, if you're going to give it a lip like this, you have to give enough of a thickness that when you pull it out sideways, it's not going to get too thin. And the last thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to sort of stabilize the inside. I'm going to try and get that bowl at the bottom just a little bit wider. And maybe I do more trimming than a professional potter might. But as long as you don't mind trimming, you can leave a big thickness on the base because you don't want to end up with too little and have it be too thin when you try to trim it, because then you've ruined your pot. And you notice that every time I do that, I'm getting more of what is basically, it's called slip, which is a mixture of clay and water. And you don't want to have a whole lot of that on your pot because it will potentially mar it, because it will dry as a sort of a track. So there's my little bowl. I just want to do a little more of a curve on this. Okay, and that's it. Here's my little bowl. It does need some trimming at the bottom. The last thing I do is use a tool like this to basically make a V, and you probably won't be able to see this, but I put it right along the wood underneath the pot and take off a little trim of clay like that. And that does two things. One is it makes the base a little bit smaller and easier to deal with when I'm trimming. And it also makes it easier for me to cut the pot off of the, oops, that was bad. You don't want to do that. Anyways, it makes it easier to cut the bowl off of the bat. Because the last thing you have to do is take a wire, which is what we use for cutting clay. So it's got two little handles on it. And I want to slide this under the pot so that it's no longer actually attached to the wood. If I left it attached to the wood while it was drying, then eventually, because the wood doesn't shrink, but the clay does, it would actually crack off the wood, and then you'd end up with a broken bottom. So what you do is you add a little bit of water underneath to just make it a little slippery. And I'm gonna run this right, see now my fingers are pushing downwards on the wood to push it as far down as I can. And as it goes under the pot, there's a bit of resistance, and I just slide right through. And you'll notice that the pot moved a little bit, and that's fine because it doesn't need to be centered anymore. And there we have my little bowl. This is my, I don't know what this is, but I found it, and I use it for prying the bat off of the wheel. You can sort of see what the edges of it look like. And then I'll come back and show you how to trim it when it's dry. This is just the clay that sticks the bat to the pottery wheel. Bye!